I had to give a history of this country, and the history is history. History has chapters, painful chapters, wonderful chapters, but it is history. When I said, when Jan van Riebeek landed in the Western Cape, our problems began.
The Jan van Riebeekstraat is a quiet street in the Netherlands. However, the street is named after the founder of the first Cape colony in South Africa. Following debates on the representation of colonial history in the public sphere and the recent Rhodes Must Fall movement, we were surprised to find out that there is no significant debate in the Netherlands on this topic. Therefore, we tried to establish who Jan van Riebeek was and how he is perceived in both the Netherlands and South Africa. In order to do so, we decided to interview 3 different participants from South Africa living in The Hague. Vuyo, a student currently following a study at Leiden University, Madi, a professor working at the African Studies Center, and François, a South African historian.
Historically speaking, in many ways, he's not that interesting, or not that important a person. His importance is about the fact that he becomes a symbol of nationalism. And that comes up not as long ago as you might think. It only really starts in the late 1800s.
Somehow, in spite of the fact that our history was brought as to beginning with Jan van Riebeek in the southern tip of Africa, in spite of that, in general, I have never experienced much aggression or violence against Jan van Riebeek and the period in which the Dutch sailors settled in South Africa and moved into the hinterland.
I know that he came in like the 1600s and landed in Cape Point and like colonized us, I guess.
Because when I was looking, because I didn't know there was a Van Riebeek Street in The Hague, and so when I looked it up, I could see it was not in the Transvaal. But I think the other thing that is happening here is this is the core of the city, and the station is a little bit outside the old core, and they're pulling this in the 19th century. And the other thing that is happening is the Netherlands is intensifying its colonialism of Indonesia. And so The Hague becomes a colonial capital city. The Dutch East India Company, which had also done terrible things and colonial things, but they were not looking to directly rule Indonesia. They were looking to profit off of it. In the 19th century, they institute this direct kind of rule, and that means that they have to build bureaucracy. And so this whole neighborhood here is built for people who work in the colonial bureaucracy. And so I think that this, I haven't found sources telling me this. The architecture looks quite modern, but this area was also bombed in the Second World War. So I suspect that this street area here was probably from around 1900, maybe just before that. If you look at the names, all of the other names here are like people related to the Dutch East Indies or the Dutch explorers or so on. So this is a kind of East Indies neighborhood. Okay, and so they choose Van Riebeek and they make Van Riebeek Plain here the center of it.
I'm not quite sure what to make of it. History is history. I know in Den Haag, but also in Haarlem, and I presume elsewhere, there's whole region, or buurten, wijken, we call it, suburbs.
Yeah, wijken, yeah.
Like in Den Haag, the Transvaal buurt, where you get all the Voortrekker leaders' names, not only Van Riebeek, but I mean all the Potgieters and the Pretorius, and I even saw names there of Afrikaan leaders that I didn't know about. So I don't know if you should omit them, and I think we then get to the same discussion as going on in the Netherlands itself. Should you break down and take away statues of Kun or people that occupied Indonesia? Isn't that ignoring the past or denying the past? Or is it taking away names and memories that are hurtful to people? I don't really have an opinion on that. I think there's two sides to it.
I did not know that, but it's quite infuriating just because he represents such a negative part of our history. Like, a lot of damage was done by him coming to South Africa. So the fact that he still has a road named after him, it's kind of like a slap in the face, and it's very insulting. Yeah.
He's been dead over 100 years, but Cecil Rhodes is still creating division. The architect of colonialism in Southern Africa is enshrined here, in stone, at his old university.
A lot of young people felt we've been waiting for 25 years now, because it's 25 years since South Africa became a democracy, and the country is still very unequal. The education system, I haven't worked in a South African university for 5 years now, but the curriculums are very old-fashioned, very Eurocentric.
Unfortunately, what happens in universities, as far as I can see at this stage, in higher education, is the drive to change is against physical structures. It's against taking away statues. It's against changing the robes people wear when they graduate. It's against taking off photos of previous rectors and important people that shaped the university. But the deep seek to change, and that is in the content in which people are educated. There's not much happening with that.
I was actually involved in the whole Rhodes Must Fall, because I was at the University of Cape Town at the time. For us, to have that statue on our university was kind of insulting, especially to the students of color, because he was a part of one of the leaders of the Cape colonies, so he was part of the apartheid regime.
Students at UCT began demolishing the shack erected on the Jameson Steps in response to a move by private security to demolish it themselves. Public order police then dispersed the students using stun grenades. Students respond with a short barrage of stones.
I always find it an issue in life that change requires revolution. And sometimes to be able to build something up, you have to break it down. On the other hand, I have an aversion towards breaking down things, because it is there already. Use it and build up from there. But life doesn't work like that. So as much as I'm horrified by the physical violence that leads to change, as much I recognize it's a necessity.
In 1955, members of the Anti-Apartheid African National Congress laid out their vision for South Africa. Their Freedom Charter declared that South Africa would belong to all its people, no matter what their colour. There would be work and security for everyone. every South African would be equal before the law. The doors of learning would be flung open to all.
Part of our education system from a young age. Like, democratic South Africa is so young, like it's only 24 years old. So you have to learn about like the whole apartheid regime and how it began. And it began with Jan van Riebeek coming. Well, what I thought about him, like he was the leader of the whole like Dutch movement to South Africa. So I don't really have a positive view on him, because they came and stole the land and kind of took over and then created a kind of oppressive country for residents who were of colour.
I'm not sure if it's still today so strong in history books, but from a very first day in our history in schools, we grew up with Jan van Riebeek. He is considered the founding father of the Afrikaners, or of the white nation in Africa. And he was always brought to us as a hero, who came there with the ships, the VOC, and established halfway station between Netherlands and Indonesia, and through him actually brought civilization to Africa and Christianity. So saved many souls. That was the picture that was brought to us as youngsters. And you know, when you're young, you believe things people tell you.
For her, she learned it in that way because that was the apartheid educational system.
Yes.
And apartheid that was good for them, right? I don't know, racial separation or segregation was what they wanted to achieve. So therefore, Jan van Riebeek was this like savior almost.
Apartheid needs, it doesn't actually start with apartheid. The history of white South Africa, at least, or the history of South Africa as they taught during apartheid, is often taught as a kind of conflict between the English and the Afrikaans. Jan van Riebeek was historically the founder of the first Dutch outpost at the Cape, but in the larger scheme of things, not actually that important a person. But later, nationalism requires a figurehead. And this actually starts during the British period. So the statue of Jan van Riebeek, which is still standing in Cape Town today, was a very controversial statue. I'm surprised it's still standing there after Rhodes Must Fall. That was purchased and paid for by Cecil John Rhodes, who was the subject of Rhodes Must Fall. And Rhodes is an Englishman, not an Afrikaner, but he still pays for the statue.
I'm really angry, like learning out, I find out that this is the case. I think the location and also the demographic of Cape Town, because Cape Town is like, in comparison to the other cities in South Africa, it's like very white, and you can still see a lot of segregation in terms of the colored people, Xhosa people, and like the wealthier English people, as well as the Afrikaans English people. So, I mean, having lived in Cape Town but coming from Johannesburg, you really feel the difference that you're kind of not welcome there as a black person. So I can understand why it has remained in Cape Town for that long. However, if it was, for instance, in Johannesburg or KwaZulu-Natal, it would probably not be there anymore.
Well, I think that I've said that there are links to the English in the sense that you've got this Charles Bell painting the statue. Certainly there were also a lot of English South Africans who were against it because it was Afrikaner nationalism, and it was bigger among the Afrikaans community. But I would say that you shouldn't wash your hands here. This was very much a celebration of white South Africa, even if it was more popular among the Afrikaners. I don't think the Afrikaners ever called it Stichtersdag. I think they always called it Van Riebeekstraat.
Exactly.
So it's the day that he landed on the Cape, and then there was a big holiday, and it's called the Founders' Day because that's where history begins, according to the official, myth of apartheid.
Or I think taking away probably it was political motivated, but they had to change public dates to bring in other dates. I mean, you can't just add on dates. So it was a kind of a prioritization of which dates are you going to use for public holidays. So you get like the 16th of June, which was the uprising in Soweto, the youth uprising, which was such a heavy, laden day in South Africa. They had to make that a public holiday. So to do that, you have to take other public holidays away. Sometimes they could merge things, like the 16th of December is also in the Afrikaner history a very, very powerful day. It is a day they made a gelofte, a pledge to God that they will always honor that day because they perceived God saving their lives at Bloed Rivier in a very violent conflict that was going on there. And that day was so valuable to the white South Africans because they saw it as a pact between them and God, that I think the ANC realized that day they can't take away. But what they did do is they changed the name. So, and I think in this whole process of seeing how they can settle this without adding fire to the fuel, Van Riebeek, 6 April fell away. And remember, that is in the period of Easter, mostly. So there are many holidays in that time.
I had to give a history of this country, and the history is history. History has chapters, painful chapters, wonderful chapters. But it is history. When I said, when Jan van Riebeek landed in the Western Cape, our problems began.
Well, obviously, I think he was quite right. Some time ago, before Zuma, Steve Biko already wrote in a book of his, of I Write Like What I Like, that 1652 was the most horrendous day that he wished had never happened in South Africa. So yeah, obviously it was the start of a confrontation between people coming from Europe with white skins and people in Africa with black skins. But that whole period in Africa, I mean, whether it is in West Africa and the whole slavery process that went on there, or whatever happened in Africa, I think were quite impactful days in the continent as a whole. So yeah, I think it was.
I mean, I think, and once again, a purely historical sense, that doesn't work. There were already Europeans arriving at the Cape in 1488. That would be the start of the trouble. I don't think everything that ever goes wrong can only be blamed on Europeans either. Zuma was certainly quite corrupt in his own right. But I think he's probably correct when he talks about a symbol, yes. Because it's a little bit, and because a lot of white media was saying, oh, you know, he doesn't understand history, or he's saying a stupid thing. But it's a bit weird that you can create this image, and then when somebody else attacks that image, you say, oh no, it's just a symbol. It's either a symbol both ways or not. So I think if Zuma is attacking the symbol of Van Riebeek, then there is some truth to it. Though I should to say that is all the trouble, on the other hand, from a guy who later got fired for being enormously corrupt and is facing criminal charges, yeah, okay, that's a bit self-serving. But I don't agree with all the attacks on the statement either. I think that Van Riebeek has become a symbol. He was made a symbol by white South Africa, and I think it is entirely right for black South Africans to also say, well, we're not happy with all the things that happened, all you did to us, which includes slavery, which includes land seizure, and which includes apartheid.
Like, I agree completely. We don't get taught about, like, really about South Africa before we were colonized, but a lot of the indigenous people were like pushed out and killed after colonization happened. So like the original South Africans. And also that's when segregation began. And then when the British came, it was like the Dutch against the British, which caused like even more strife in South Africa. But I do believe that Jan van Riebeek coming to South Africa was a big problem for our country and the start of our troubles, because I'm not sure if he didn't come, obviously the British would have, so there could have been segregation in that way, but guaranteed him coming and the Dutch people believing that they're better than Africans because of the color of their skin created our whole history, and it's something that we are still very much affected by today. Yeah.